So having discussed the East India Company and why it struck the Americans so important, let's talk a little bit more about the commodity that they were selling and the commodity that the Bostonians would subsequently dump into the harbor, tea. And I want to talk specifically about the journey that tea takes from China to Europe to America, most of the way around the world. Why was tea so important to the Bostonians' protest? Was it just a symbol that they happened to pick up because Parliament charged a 3 penny per pound tax on it? Why did it strike the people of the time as being so significant? People would later say in the middle of the Revolution, oh, this little thing called tea has started this huge world war, and it struck people as so ironic at the time. But I think if we understand the mentality of the people of the 18th century towards tea, we may be able to make this seem a little bit clearer. Beginning in the 1580s, Europeans adopted 3 caffeinated drinks that basically they had never heard of before. One of them was chocolate, which came from Mexico. One of them was coffee, which came from Ethiopia and Yemen. And the other was tea, which came from China. None of these drinks were particularly palatable to Europeans. They didn't like the taste of any of them, even though the people in Mexico, Ethiopia, Yemen, and China, they liked chocolate, coffee, and tea just fine. But Europeans didn't really like the taste of any of them. They were a little bit bitter until they combined them with sugar. And so sugar is a topic we'll be getting to a little bit later. All the tea prepared for the global market at that time came from China. You could find tea in the foothills of India, but that stuff isn't making it to the coast and being sold around the world. The tea that people were drinking in Russia, in Persia, in Europe at the time, all of that came from China, where it was deeply embedded in the culture. It was carefully cultivated, processed, and then brought to Guangzhou or Canton, where European trading companies were allowed to purchase it, transport it wherever they wanted it, and sell it. In Britain, tea was initially a curiosity, and then it became an expensive luxury, sometimes used as a medicine, right? Now we think of tea as being so deeply embedded in British culture, but at first, it wasn't common enough for English people to have definite opinions about it or what it could be useful for. But by the 18th century, by the 1700s, it had become a major commodity. It was by far the most valuable import of the East India Company, which was importing 13 million pounds of the stuff in 1772. And the duties collected from tea that the British government collected accounted for 6% of Great Britain's national budget. So tea is important to the government, it's important to the economy, and it's becoming important to the culture. As the supply grew, as I mentioned before, this was partly because of the East India Company and partly because of smugglers, but as the supply grows, the price drops, and so more and more people in England and Scotland could afford to drink tea. Tea also becomes one of the many new imported goods that Americans were enjoying during the 18th century. During the 17th century, they couldn't necessarily afford as many English goods. All of a sudden, beginning in the 1740s, Americans can afford all sorts of stuff to import from England and Scotland, and tea is one of them. Tea becomes, even though Americans are enjoying lots of new imported luxury goods, tea becomes particularly savored in America, just as it was in Britain, because it was an exotic stimulant, it was a status symbol, and it was the focus of a feminine domestic ritual. So I'll draw your attention to the third image from 1764. This is called The Honeymooners. It was part of an English series of paintings about modern love. And you can see this young woman adding sugar to her husband's tea, right? So reinforcing this sense of them as a couple is the idea of the woman serving tea to her husband. Right? So in this way, tea at the time was thought to encourage family togetherness, it encouraged pleasant conversation, and it was a polite ritual that often fell under women's direction. Tea also, because it had caffeine, it encouraged productivity, and because you often drank it in fancy tea things made of ceramic and silver, it was a way that you showed your respectability. And so for these reasons, it was irresistible not just to wealthy people, but also to the middle class. But tea also created controversy, as we can see in the fourth image. This is an image called The Tea Table, and the caption underneath begins, "How we see scandal, for our sex too base, seat its dread empire in the female race." This verse, these poetic verses go on, and the author laments that destructive scandal circulates among women at tea, and so therefore tea was something that you needed to be wary of. So there are a few different reasons why tea was thought to be suspect. One is not everyone was sure it was healthy. Right? It's a new product. It seems foreign and strange. It's not something that your great-grandmother was drinking. So not everyone's sure that its physical health effects are going to be beneficial. There was a suggestion that maybe it might cause all sorts of digestive ailments and other types of ailments. Secondly, luxury goods in general, including tea, were thought to be troubling because they upended older, traditional, hereditary notions of who should be on top, who was superior, and who was inferior. Because goods are something that anyone with money can potentially afford to buy, all of a sudden you could be somebody from a completely lower class background but own all of the trappings of wealth, and this was thought to threaten the older order, the older social order. So that's another thing about luxury goods that make people nervous. And so if anyone can drink tea, then how do you determine who's better than anyone else, right? So this is another problem. The third is that paying too much attention to luxury, because these are worldly goods, this was thought to be sinful. And so you have many religious writers saying, well, no, we shouldn't be paying attention to these luxury things. We should be paying more attention to the state of our eternal souls. So that's another set of concerns. And finally, tea was thought to be worrisome because of what we see in this fourth image in the tea table. Women who gathered at the tea table might, who knows what they might do when they got together, right? It seems harmless to us, but women getting together without any supervision, who knows what might happen, right? They might tease, they might overspend on various goods having to do with tea. They might scold their husband in order to give them money to afford more tea things. They would be idle. They wouldn't be paying attention to their domestic duties. They might gossip, and they might cause scandal. So in other words, because tea might, so people were worried that tea might empower women and that it might feminize men, right, by drawing men into women's circle and women's sets of values. Now, today, all these critiques that I've just talked about seem snobbish, they seem suspicious, they seem misogynistic. And you can see this in a quote from a lawyer from England who was visiting Boston. He wrote, "The ladies here visit, drink tea, and indulge every little piece of gentility to the height of the mode, or to the height of fashion, and they neglect the affairs of their families with as good a grace as the finest ladies in London." So he's being sarcastic here, but this was a real concern, that tea was going to cause women to neglect their duties. It was going to draw men into this cycle of spending money on luxury goods, and it was just going to weaken society as a whole. And this was something that was really bothering people at the time. So even though tea is very desirable, it can make you more productive, it can make you more respectable, it's also something that's new and controversial, and it's something that's making people uneasy. So this is how the conversation went in Britain, and by extension, this conversation bled over into America. But in the American colonies, there was also a fifth concern, which is that luxury goods had all of these problems, and they threatened to make the colonies dependent on Great Britain. If America becomes addicted to tea, and caffeine obviously is actually addictive, but there was a thought that Americans were not just becoming addicted to tea, but all of the different fine goods that they imported to Great Britain. If they became dependent on getting this stuff from Great Britain, then Great Britain could use this as leverage to have more and more power over the colonies. It was bad enough that colonists had no power to vote, but if they also were economically under the thumb of the British metropolis, this was seen as something worrisome. And so that's one of the things that motivates the non-importation agreements that begin in 1768, this idea that, well, if we show Great Britain that we can get by on our own without British luxury goods, without tea, without fancy cloth and textiles from Great Britain, then that will force Great Britain to take us more seriously, and will force them to make more concessions to us and possibly lift the taxes that the Americans found so obnoxious.